Okay, so I'm Alexis Halliday, and the book I got was Odd Girls and Twilight Lovers, A History of Lesbian Life in 20th Century America, and here's my physical copy. So kind of the main argument that I got from the author, who's Lily Federman, her whole theme of this book was to express that there isn't like one single lesbian that kind of defines the whole broad spectrum of them. Hers was there are lots of different subcultures within lesbian life, and some of them maybe don't get along, some of them get along great, but there are many different subcultures within lesbian life. And that was kind of her main kind of thing, and the way that she explains it is by, in this quote, it's in the introduction on page 7. It says, "The general movement of this book is in the direction of tracing the development of lesbian subcultures." And then further on it says, "My goal has not been to trace the development of the lesbian." So she doesn't want to define what a lesbian is, because obviously there are very many different types of people who identify as lesbian, who don't fit into one category, but at the same time also do fit into a subculture with many different people that believe in the same values and traditions and beliefs as them. Anyways, so she kind of explains all of this through eras. She starts in the early 1800s, and then, or not early 1800s, the late 1800s, like 1890s and stuff, and then she progresses up to like the 1990s to now. In each of those, she kind of explains the major movements that happen within lesbian culture throughout those times, along with the culture that's surrounding America and what is going on, like including the wars, Great Depression, the different movements for either racial equality or voting or anything like that kind of comes into play with this. And she sees how each of these subcultures kind of interact with these different movements throughout America and time. One of my favorite, so one of the chapters that I did pick was just the first chapter. The reason why I picked the first chapter as an important chapter that I felt was very important is because in the earliest 20th century, lesbian wasn't a term that had been made yet by sexologists. At the time, they considered two young females who were very close to each other and who loved each other. They considered them as romantic friends. This kind of changed. So in the beginning, it was a normal thing. The quote that I have is, "Early 20th century women, particularly those of the middle class, had grown up in a society where love between young females was considered the norm, a rehearsal in girlhood of the great drama of women's life, where women's love for one another was thought to constitute the richness, consolation, and joy of their lives." So, like I said, romantic friendships were very regular. They were a normal thing, and lots of women did it, especially in college, especially because early colleges were all women-based colleges. And so they would form these romantic friendships with these other women that they were living with. And it was accepted at the time. People could get away with it, and a lot of it was because they didn't think that these women necessarily, they didn't think of them as a way of having like a sexually active relationship. So I thought that was super interesting to hear because it explains a lot about those relationships between these women. The other chapter that I picked was chapter 9, and why I thought it was important was because basically chapter 9 is about it's about lesbian feminists during the 70s, which I thought was a really big thing because this is a really clear example of why lesbian feminists, why not all subcultures got along. The quote that I picked was, "It became apparent in the course of the decade that lesbian feminists were as diverse a group as one might find in the heterosexual world, and those who were brought together by their general radical views were not immune to the factionalism that has beset most minority groups after the initial euphoria of discovering commonalities." So basically, they had these idealized fantasies of having their own life and community, and living together within their subculture, and they didn't fully accept other subcultures. So I thought that was really interesting, and I thought it was pertinent to this book to show that not all the cultures were the same. Lesbian life has not always been the same since the beginning, and yeah, and so it was a really, really good book to read, and yeah, that's it.